Hi, and welcome to today's current news. Today is Thursday, May 9th, 2024. Israel-Gaza war. Biden to halt some arms supplies if Israel invades Rafah. President Joe Biden has warned Israel that the U.S. will stop supplying some weapons if it launches a major ground operation in the Gaza city of Rafah. If they go into Rafah, I am not supplying the weapons that they have been used historically to deal with Rafah, he said during the interview with CNN. He added that he would continue to make sure Israel is secure. Despite firm and vocal U.S. opposition, Israel appears poised to mount a large-scale invasion of Rafah. The congested part of southern Gaza is Hamas's last major stronghold in the territory. U.S. officials have warned that an operation in the city, where the population has swelled with refugees from other parts of Gaza, could lead to extensive civilian casualties. We're not going to supply the weapons and artillery shells, Mr. Biden said in the interview, which aired on Wednesday. He said the U.S. did not define the current situation in Rafah as a ground operation. They haven't gone into population centers. What they did is right on the border, he said. But I've made it clear to Israeli Prime Minister Net and the War Cabinet they're not going to get our support, if in fact they go to these population centers. Mr. Biden acknowledged that U.S. weapons had been used by Israel to kill civilians in Gaza. When asked if Israel had crossed a red line, the U.S. president replied, "Not yet." The comments among the president's strongest warning yet over a potential ground invasion of Rafah and mark the first time he has said the U.S. could stop shipments of American weapons to Israel. The U.S. has already delayed a shipment of thousands of bombs to Israel and has said it is reviewing future deliveries. On Wednesday, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin confirmed the delay of the bomb shipment, some of the most destructive munitions in Western military arsenals, while testifying in front of the Senate. The Israeli government said it was disappointed by the move. The weapons held back by the U.S. are related to a future delivery, so the move is unlikely to have an immediate impact. But given the rate at which Israel is bombing, it will probably affect future strikes fairly soon. The Israeli military, meanwhile, has said that the two countries will resolve disagreements behind closed doors. President Biden faces mounting domestic pressure from some Democrats and parts of the U.S. public to rein in Israel's operation in Gaza, amid rising civilian deaths and a worsening humanitarian situation. U.S. officials confirmed that no new aid supplies had been delivered in Gaza via two gates in the south since Israeli tanks rolled into southern Rafah and took control of the Palestinian side of the crossing with Egypt this week. Israeli military spokesman Daniel Hagari said the U.S. had provided unprecedented security assistance since the beginning of the war, adding that disputes between the allies were resolved behind closed doors in a matter-of-fact way. But a leading member of Mr. Likkud's party in Israel told BBC's NewsHour on Wednesday he believed U.S. domestic political considerations were behind the decision to halt the delivery of bombs. "I totally disagree that the American election has nothing to do with it," said Boaz Bismuth, a member of both the Israeli parliament and the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee.
والله يا تو ناسين مش عارفين وين بدنا نروح، عمال هاني قاعد بجري، انا كنت نازح في الاول في المجازر ما وصلت وكاله وراح لي ولد فيها. وهيني عمال بدي اقطع مش عارف وين بدي اروح على المواصل ولا اروح على الزواج مش عارفين وين بدنا نروح. قاعدين بنجري لما بندري قاعدين.
ولا منطقة في كل غزة رفح المكان الوحيد اللي يشمل كل العالم 2 مليون نسمة وين الناس تروح؟ برياس وين اروح؟ وين؟ شو فورة؟
ما كل الشعب ايش بدهم ايانا؟ ايش اللي بدهم ايانا؟
Rafah has been a key entry point for aid, and the only exit for people able to flee since the start of the war between Israel and Hamas last October. The crossing remained closed on Wednesday morning, but the Israeli military said it was reopening the nearby Karim Shalom crossing, which had been closed for 4 days because of the Hamas rocket fire. On Monday, the Israeli military ordered tens of thousands of civilians to begin evacuating eastern parts of Rafah City, ahead of what it's called a limited operation to eliminate Hamas fighters and dismantle infrastructure. Meanwhile, efforts continue to reach a ceasefire, alongside the release of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners. In Cairo, delegations from Israel and Hamas have resumed negotiations through mediators. A U.S. official said that talks with Israel were ongoing and have not fully addressed our concerns, and the U.S. had been reviewing its weapons transfers to Israel since April. Israel launched a campaign to destroy Hamas in response to the group's attack on southern Israel on 7 October, during which about 1,200 people were killed and 252 others were taken hostage, according to official Israeli tallies. More than 34,780 people have been killed in Gaza since then, according to the territory Hamas-run health ministry. A deal agreed in November saw Hamas release 105 hostages in return for a week-long ceasefire and some 240 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. Israel says 128 hostages are unaccounted for, 36 of whom are presumed dead. Florida deputies who fatally shot U.S. airmen burst into wrong apartment, attorney says. Deputies responding to a disturbance call at a Florida apartment complex burst into the wrong unit and fatally shot a black U.S. Air Force airman who was home alone when they saw he was armed with a gun, an attorney for the man's family said Wednesday. Senior Airman Roger Fortson, 23, who was based at the Special Operations Wing at Hurlburt Field, was in his off-base apartment in Fort Walton Beach when the shooting happened on May 3rd. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump said in a statement that Fortson was on a FaceTime call with a woman at the time of the encounter. According to Crump, the woman, whom Crump didn't identify, said Fortson was alone in his apartment when he heard a knock at the door. He asked who was there, but didn't get a response. A few minutes later, Fortson heard a louder knock, but didn't see anyone when he looked through the peephole, Crump said, citing the woman's account. The woman said Fortson was concerned and went to retrieve his gun, which Crump said was legally owned. As Fortson walked back through his living room, deputies burst through the door and saw that Fortson was armed and shot him 6 times. According to Crump's statement, the woman said Fortson was on the ground saying, "I can't breathe," after he was shot, Crump said. Fortson died at a hospital, officials said. The deputy involved in the shooting was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. The woman said Fortson wasn't causing a disturbance during their FaceTime call and believes that the deputies must have had the wrong apartment, Crump's statement said. The circumstances surrounding Roger's death raise serious questions that demand immediate answers from authorities, especially considering the alarming witness statement that the police entered the wrong apartment, Crump said. We are calling for transparency in the investigation into Roger's death and the immediate release of body cam video to the family, Crump said. His family and the public deserve to know what occurred in the moments leading up to this tragedy. Crump is a nationally known attorney based in Tallahassee, Florida. He has been involved in multiple high-profile law enforcement shooting cases involving black people, including those of Ahmaud Arbery, Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, Tal Nicholas, and George Floyd. Crump and Fortson's family plan to speak at a news conference in Fort Walton Beach on Thursday morning. The Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office didn't immediately respond to an email or voicemail from the Associated Press seeking comment about Crump's claims. But Sheriff Eric Aden posted a statement on Facebook Wednesday afternoon expressing sadness about the shooting. At this time, we humbly ask for our community's patience as we work to understand the facts that resulted in this tragic event, Aden said. The sheriff's office said in a statement last week that a deputy responding to a call of disturbance in progress that the apartment complex reacted in self-defense after encountering an armed man. The office did not offer details on what kind of disturbance deputies were responding to or who called them. The sheriff's office also declined to immediately identify the responding deputies or their races. Officials said earlier this week that the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and the local state attorney's office will investigate the shooting. FDLE spokeswoman Gretel Plessinger told the Associated Press on Wednesday that it is highly unlikely the agency will have any further comment until the investigation is complete. Fortson was assigned to the 4th Special Operations Squadron as a special missions aviator, where one of his roles as a member of the squadron's AC-130J Ghost Rider aircrew was to load the gunship's 30mm and 105mm cannons during missions. Fortson's death draws striking similarities to other black people killed in recent years by police in their homes, in circumstances that involved officers responding to the wrong address or responding to service calls with wanton uses of deadly force. In 2018, a white former Dallas police officer fatally shot Botham Jean, an unarmed black man, after mistaking his apartment for her own. Amber Guyer, the former officer, was found guilty of murder the following year and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. In 2019, a white former Fort Worth, Texas officer fatally shot Tatiana Jefferson through a rear window of her home after responding to a non-emergency call reporting that Jefferson's front door was open. Aaron Dean, the former officer, was found guilty of manslaughter in 2022 and was sentenced to nearly 12 years in prison. Crump has represented families in both cases as part of his ongoing effort to force accountability for the killing of black people at the hands of police. What I'm trying to do, as much as I can, even sometimes single-handedly, is increase the value of black life, Crump told the Associated Press in 2021 following the conviction of former Minneapolis officer in the murder of George Floyd. Fort Walton Beach is between Panama City Beach and Pensacola in the Florida Panhandle. In a decade of drug overdoses, more than 320,000 American children lost a parent. More than 320,000 children across the United States lost a parent due to a drug overdose between 2011 and 2021. That's according to a new study published in JAMA Psychiatry Wednesday. It's a call to arms to pay close attention to the consequences of a parent who dies due to a drug overdose, says Harvard neuroscientist Charles Nelson III, who wasn't involved in the new study. The impact of the country's overdose epidemic on children is something we really don't speak much about, says Dr. Nora Volkow, director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse and an author of the new study. The overdose numbers and mortality are so high that it attracts all of the attention and urgency to address it, to protect people from dying, she adds. But at the same time, we've basically neglected to realize that when someone dies, there is a family that's left behind. And if the family has young children, that makes them very, very vulnerable. Several federal agencies, including the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, conducted the study. Kids who experience the death of a parent or a primary caregiver are at risk of a range of poor health and educational outcomes, according to previous research. For example, the death of a parent makes children more likely to do poorly at school and even drop out. A 2018 study found that children who experience the sudden death of a parent are more likely to have trouble functioning and have symptoms of depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. The new paper has inspired by recent studies on estimates of children who lost a parent or primary caregiver to COVID-19, says Volkow, drawing attention to the multi-generational effects of the pandemic. Volkow and her co-authors found that the rate of children who lost a parent from an overdose by 134% during the study period, from 27 per 100,000 children in 2011 to 63 per 100,000 in 2021. More children, over 192,000, lost a father to drug overdose compared to 129,000 who lost a mother. More than half of these bereaved kids had parents who died between the ages of 26 to 40 years, followed by 41 to 64 years, and 18 to 25 years. The largest number of parents who died were non-Hispanic white, followed by Hispanic and Black. However, the highest rate of parental drug overdose losses were among American Indian and Alaska Native children. Children that come from underrepresented groups with higher adversity, economic and social, which already puts them at higher risk for behavioral health disorders and mental health disorders, says Volkow. Those risks can be further exacerbated by the death of a parent due to overdose, she adds. When I read the newspaper, I had this sense of deja vu, says Nelson, who is an author of a 2021 study that estimated that the number of children in the United States who lost a parent due to COVID-19 related causes. However, the long-term risks may be even greater for kids who lost a parent due to drug overdose, says Nelson. A memorial for those lost to the opioid epidemic in Binghamton, New York in August 2021. There's so many factors involved so that kids could get very, very tangled up in their thinking about why their parent overdosed, says Nelson. For example, a child might get preoccupied with questions like, was it preventable? Why did my father do this? Why didn't they stop taking drugs? He says. Besides, as the study points out, growing up in a household where a parent uses substances is itself a childhood trauma, with potential for long-term health consequences for a child. That there's all the neglect that goes along with that, with certain substances. That's very common, says Nelson. There is the abuse that sometimes travels with it. As a result, a child whose parent died from a drug overdose may experience complex grief and need more specialized mental health care, he adds. There are other factors adding more stress to the lives of these bereaved children, says Nelson. The worst of it is the stigma associated with having lost a parent to an overdose, he says. So that would mean that these kids could be stigmatized in school. Then there is the risk of future substance use. As these kids get to adolescence, they too might start using drugs, says Nelson. It gets really complicated. Volkow hopes the study will spur actions to better address the needs of these children, so their long-term risks can be minimized. For example, she hopes there will be efforts made to keep children with their siblings and/or other relatives, with families receiving the support and services they need to address these children's mental health needs. If a child loses a parent, and the child welfare system comes in and they remove them, and they take them away from the siblings, and then they lose not just the parent, they lose the sibling, they lose the school system that they have, says Volkow. And there is a lot more to be done to prevent the death of parents due to overdoses in the first place, says Volkow. Through policies that encourage parents to seek treatment for their substance use. However, parents, especially mothers and pregnant women, face tremendous stigma and punitive state laws, which discourage them from seeking treatment, she says. As a physician, if someone comes to me and they are actually taking drugs and say they are pregnant, I have to report that, Volkow says. In some states, such reporting eventually leads to the child being taken away from the mother soon after birth. Laws like these discourage women from seeking treatment for substance use, she adds. Seeking treatment should not be something that people should be afraid of. Some students who protested at colleges don't regret potential punishment. Amr Gadami is jumping up and down at the beat of a drum. He has a rolled up piece of paper in one of his hands that he moves to the rhythm of the crowd's chant. Disclose, divest, we will not stop, we will not rest, he chants along with hundreds of students at the University of Texas at Austin's South Lawn. Gadami is a Palestinian American studying economics and government, and for the last couple of weeks, he's been participating in the protest against Israel's military actions in Gaza. Israel has been responding to the October 7th attack by Hamas, which killed over 1,200 and took over 200 people as hostages. Over 34,000 Palestinians have been killed during the war in Gaza. We have a duty to advocate for Palestine, to ensure that people understand the narrative, the Palestinian narrative, the history of the Palestinian struggle, Gadami told NPR Sunday. The demonstrations at UT Austin have been mostly peaceful, although at times tensions have increased and students have been arrested, including Gadami, who was the first person arrested nearly 2 weeks ago. We will continue to come out and advocate for Palestine, no matter what obstacles UT administration or state government tries to put in our way, Gadami said. Gadami's charges were later dropped. Most students arrested were charged with criminal trespass. Brian Davis, a spokesperson for the University of UT Austin, told NPR in an email that students violated several institutional rules, which include attempting to establish an encampment, unauthorized use of amplified sound, and shoving staff. However, no student has been charged with assault. It's clear if these students would be put on probation, suspended, or expelled. Davis said no disciplinary action has been distributed, but that it could happen once final exams are done this week. Sam Law, a Jewish American graduate student, was arrested after participating in a pro-Palestinian protest at UT Austin. He was charged with criminal trespass and is now concerned about potential punishment. As a person of conscience, I cannot let threats like that deter me, Law told NPR from his Austin home. I am really worried that I've had a lot of conversations with the chair of my department, with lawyers about what might happen if the university pursues disciplinary action. According to the Associated Press, there have been over 2,000 arrests on college campuses in relation to pro-Palestinian protests and encampments. The disciplinary actions taken by the universities are unknown. Some of them have cited federal education privacy laws to not provide numbers on how many students are subject to disciplinary actions. But some students have been sharing their stories. Cornell University doctoral student Mamoudou Tal was suspended for participating in a pro-Palestinian encampment. The school has deemed that my activity or my participation on campus is a threat somehow, Tal said. Tal was never arrested, but his involvement with pro-Palestinian team negotiating with Cornell University administrators got him suspended, he said. He is now in a fairly unique position. Tal is a British student, and a suspension could lead him to losing his international student visa. Fundamentally, I risked all that I've risked so far for what I believe is a just cause, and that's the Palestinian cause, Tal said. In a written response to NPR, Cornell University said students have been offered an opportunity to get their suspensions lifted. The university determined that if a student could commit to abide by the terms of the temporary suspension and not facilitate, engage in, participate, or assist in any other violations of university policy, it would be appropriate to modify the temporary suspension to allow for incompletes to be entered for the spring 2024 term. Joel M. Molina, Cornell's vice president for university relations, said, "This would provide an opportunity to complete coursework and earn credit for the term at a later date when the student is able to resume academic activities." Tal is considering his options. He said he was guided by his conscience and that participating in the protest was the right thing to do. Anna Ivey, a former dean of admissions at the University of Chicago Law School, said suspensions and expulsions could pose serious consequences since they remain in the student's academic records. You probably will have to disclose it somewhere when you try to find other alternatives to move on with your life, Ivy, who owns a company that advises students on their college application, said. But the disciplinary actions are not necessarily career-ending for students. I think a lot of admissions officers are watching in horror at how students are being treated, Ivy said. So I don't think that they should assume that they are necessarily going to encounter hostility or that people aren't going to look at the circumstances. Someone who is thinking about what to do next is Nick Wilson, a suspended undergraduate student at Cornell University. He was one of the students arrested in March for occupying an administrative building. He said it was scary to learn about the disciplinary actions Cornell was taking against him. What's happening in Gaza is so striking. Such a moral atrocity, Wilson said, from his on-campus housing room. For me, and for students like me, students who are facing police violence, students who are facing arrest, students who are facing suspension, this is a cause that just matters more. Wilson and other students said they'd do it again, as long as the universities refuse to divest from businesses with ties to Israel.